Beyond Analytics. We are the only podcast that exclusively focuses on data-driven insights and analytics for a modern retail business. I'm Abhijit and I'm joined by my co-founder Roshan. And today we talk about a very interesting topic, how to make sense of a retail prediction model with a little bit of help from AI. Roshan, do you want to set the stage and kick us off?
Hey, Vijay, thanks for this, and certainly excited to talk about this topic today. If you think about it, using predictive models in retail isn't really a new thing. I mean, retail teams, retail planners have been using something like a regression model for forecasting or some kind of clustering or models to help segment customers, for example, right? Now, the basic premise being it's kind of a mathematical relationship between inputs and outputs in some ways, right? You think about, hey, I want to tweak the discount levels that I offer in a certain product or a certain product category, right? You could think of this as the controllables, right? In some ways, that's your input. That's, often in the technical parlance could be called as an independent variable of sorts. And then from there, you're establishing a mathematical relationship to an output, which could be something like, hey, what does a change in my discount lead to a change in, say, the quantum of sales, right? The units of sales or the volumes or the revenue and so on, right? It's the simplest form of a predictive model that you could kind of think of, right? The challenge with using something like this, if you look at it from the lens of a business user, is ultimately the model is going to spit out a bunch of numbers, a bunch of outputs, right? And it's a head scratcher at that point for most business users. Because even if you look at one of the simplest models, like a linear regression model, right? You're going to get in the output some kind of a coefficient, some kind of a standard error, some kind of a confidence metric. And at that point, as a business user, you're thinking, hey, what sense does this make to me in terms of my decision making, right? How can I tweak my pricing or products based on what the model results are telling me today? And I think that sense making is what we often call as the interpretation gap in some ways. The other aspect of the model results, often the predictive model results, often is trying to build a level of confidence in those results, right? Another way to put it is like a confidence gap or a trust gap. So, hey, has the model been trained with the right kind of data, right? Did that data have a lot of outliers? Can I understand that even once I get the model results? Can I know if there is a level of overfitting that has happened in the model, right? Do I know if the inputs I'm giving to the model at the point of, say, inference, at the point of prediction, are within the range of inputs, broadly within the range of inputs that the model has seen before? Or am I extrapolating too much beyond a certain range that was used for training, right? So these are often the kind of questions that will run through the mind of a business decision maker once they see an output from a predictive model. So it really comes down to the ability to have some storytelling, some sense making once you run your models, right? Otherwise, we've talked to a lot of executives who say that, hey, we've bought these SaaS tools. They seem to be fantastic. They seem to be very credible in terms of number crunching. But one big gap we have is to figure out what's going on with the results. So that's kind of just a couple of challenges we see time and again. Abhijit, I'm curious, you want to lead us on with some examples on this?
You're absolutely spot on, Roshan, there, right? I mean, uh, let's take a scenario, right? And let's build on to what you actually spoke about and talk about a sample linear regression output, which I would say is one of the most widely used prediction models in retail at this point of time. And at a high level, what it helps, right? It helps teams in forecasting sales, or even think of a scenario where the teams are trying to assess a promotional lift, or even think of scenarios where some teams are trying to estimate the elasticity for that matter, right? Let's take a good example here that we have, right? And this I would say is a overly simplified regression model output, and we have just taken one variable here, and it is trying to predict the weekly units sold. and it's taking into account the discount percentage as the main input variable. So I would say this is a very overly simplified, trimmed down output, just taking one variable into consideration. Now, what it consists, right? As you mentioned, it has one coefficient which essentially tells us how much the outcome will change when the variable increases by 1 unit, in this case, discount. Then we have a standard error which tells us how confident we are about the coefficient. Smaller the value, the better it is. Then we have the t start, which shows us how strong the variable's effect is on outcome. So it tells us how strong the correlation is between the two. And higher absolute values typically suggest stronger evidence. And finally, as you mentioned, we have the p-value, right? That tells us whether the relationship is statistically significant. Typically, values below 0.05 generally mean that whatever the model is spitting out is likely to be a reality. So, looking at this scenario, right, at a high level, what is this model trying to convey? This tells us that even if we have no discount applied, the baseline weekly sales are expected to be 1500. And for every 1% increase in discount, the sales are predicted to increase by approximately 120 units per week. Uh, the high T stat and the low P values are indicating that these are statistically significant and very much likely to be a reality. Now, keep yourself in a business consumer, in the role of a business consumer of this model, right? It can at times, or I would say most of the times, be daunting to try and make sense of these numbers, as you rightly pointed out, right? To interpret these numbers. And now you try to interpret these numbers in a given context. Which month are you in? Which week are you in? Which product, which life cycle of a product are you in when you're trying to interpret these numbers? And the task becomes more and more daunting, especially when these numbers are churned by either your data science team, or you say as you mentioned, a SaaS product that has churned out these numbers, right? And that's where I think LLMs can be of a huge advantage. Now, moving the context a bit towards what LLM is, right? I mean, I don't want to get into much details of what LLMs are, but LLMs typically, as we all know, or as we all are much acquainted to, are best known for its chat interfaces. You ask a question, you get an answer, right? But however, I would say at a fundamental level, the LLMs are designed to interpret and generate natural language. And it's important to know that they're generating the natural language based on the context that you're providing to it. And in this particular example, right, LLMs can act as an interpreter between the technical model and your real world decision. They help by taking model structured output and producing narrative explanations, even going ahead and doing some recommendations, and even going one step further and trying to simulate some real world scenarios for that matter. Now, what this does is this makes the predictive model not just accurate, which is the baseline, I would say, KPI for any model, but also useful, or I would say actionable, by transforming these raw numbers into stories that decision makers can now understand, trust, and act on. So think of a scenario where the retailer in this case is choosing the right discount strategy, or even say a scenario where a pricing analyst is trying to price the product in its life cycle. These scenarios can be supercharged, I would say, when combined with an LLM. Roshan, what do you think on this?
Abhijit, I love your point about really driving towards this being actionable at the end of the day. I think the way I tend to look at LLMs, right, it's great at information retrieval, broadly speaking, on the basis of what has been used to train it before, right? Content and whatnot. But interestingly enough, it's also great at trying to explain things in a simplified way at multiple levels of abstraction, right? Based on who the audience is and so on. And also the fact that, again, this has somewhat been a point of increasing debate of late, but also I believe there is an element of uh, reasoning capabilities within LLMs, right? I think the three facets of how this hybrid approach, I like to call it a hybrid approach because you're taking the more hardcore statistical sort of models, right, around forecasting and prediction, and then combining them along with the power of LLMs to kind of cross the bridge, right? These gaps that we talked about, the interpretation gap, the trust gap, and so on. One of the pillars to this is what we like to call as the narrative summarization. I think, Abhijit, you captured it quite well. You have a bunch of model outputs, numerical model outputs, and you're helping build a story for the business user on the basis of those outputs, right? So my inquiry may be simple. Hey, what would happen? What could happen if I were to offer a 6% discount on a certain product line? What would it do in terms of my uplift, right? So that's kind of, it's almost inferencing a little bit, but it's really summarizing what the model output is telling you in some ways, right? Or something like, hey, is there a level of confidence in the model results based on the statistical significance of the results and so on, right? The second aspect of this really is there are insights in the model results that may be fairly non-obvious in nature, right? I mean, the insights are all there, but given the overwhelming nature of data that the model may spit out, a statistical model may spit out, me as a human analyst or me as a business, somebody in a business role may miss out these insights. So, for example, hey, are there certain product categories that are likely to do better in their uplift, right? Given a certain percent discount at a certain time of the year, right? Now, some of these nuggets are sitting right there in the data, but it's hard to connect the dots often, right? And so I think LLMs are good, and I think soon enough we'll have some working examples of this in another part of the session. I know, but LLMs are really good at trying to sort of analyze those numerical inputs and then being able to kind of sense make out of it. And the third one that comes to mind is also a very interesting example. We had a customer of ours who tried to adopt the results of a prediction model, right? So the model essentially said, look, for every percentage of discount that you offer, there is an X units, similar to the example you showed, Abhijit, about 120 units bump up for every percentage of discount. And they tried it in certain product categories saying, hey, look, we offered a 2% discount or 3% discount on a certain product category. And guess what? We didn't get the lift we were expecting, right? Um, and that kind of brings us to the notion of, hey, can I now inquire further? This notion of contextual inquiry based on a situation, based on a circumstance. Can I have the model inquire further about the possibility of what worked and why didn't something work in some sense, right? And so it was very effective in pointing out things like, hey, did you consider the fact that there was competitive activity in that category, right? In terms of a competitive promotion around the same time as the time you were running the promotion. Or for that matter, it also figured out that if you merely offer a 3% discount, it's not a psychologically strong enough a driver for a consumer to kind of latch on to your offering, right? So there's a certain threshold, there's a certain psychological threshold of discount that needs to be given in that product category for your promotion to kind of make sense. And so I think these were some really good insights that could be queried when the context of the result was given, and we could have an inquiry with the model, right? Some kind of an inquiry with the model. So these are the 3 or 4 pillars that come to mind about how this, sort of potent mix of conventional, call it a hardcore statistical model, right, combined with a more modern LLM can give you that end-to-end picture of and more importantly, a picture from a business context here. So Yeah, that's a little bit about impact of LLMs and how to kind of drive sense making on your predictive retail models. Abhijit, over to you. I know we have some exciting stuff coming up in the next section of this session.
That's right. And these three pillars are a great enabler for our next session, because in our next session, we'll be trying each of these in a real world scenario with a real world prompt, and get some exciting outputs, or try to get some exciting outputs. And that's what beyond analytics really means, right? It's not just building better models, it's making them more communicable, or making them more useful. And in this case, LLMs make prediction models more explainable. To keep this momentum going, right, our next theme is somewhat focused on a similar topic. And we are talking, if LLMs can narrate and explain models this well, can they also replace BI dashboards? Now, that's a wild thought, actually, right? I mean, something to really think on. So we are the team at Nexlytix. Until then, take care.